Hi, Ted Morrissey here, and I'm doing a video book launch for my new novel, The Strophes of Job, and it is a prequel, whoops, gotta get on there, to my novel Crowsong for the Stricken, which came out in 2017, did pretty well for itself. But Strophes of Job is a prequel to this novel, Crowsong for the Stricken, also available in paperback. But when I wrote Crowsong for the Stricken, I had a few experimental things I was trying to do with the novel. I want to touch on here because I continue some of that with the Strophes of Job. Mainly, what I was trying to do experimentally with Crowsong for the Stricken was to write a novel from multiple perspectives, from multiple characters' perspective. That's not particularly revolutionary, but each story, episode, chapter, whatever you want to call them, would be from a different character's perspective, but also each would be written as a standalone short story. But also, they would connect to sort of the superstructure of what was this evolving, novel form as well. And so every story I wrote, I also had in mind the larger narrative structure, and I would send those stories out as I was working on the whole project. And I was, very gratified that all of them got picked up eventually, and some, reprinted a couple times and won some, little lesser awards here and there. But I found the whole process very satisfying. But I ended up with this novel that was very different from anything I had written before. And I really wasn't sure what people would think of it. So I kind of started sending it out in the world. And surprisingly, it was by far my most critically successful novel. It won a couple of different awards. Kirkus Reviews gave it a starred review and named it a Best Indie Book of 2017. So that was all very cool. But I wasn't quite done with the characters. Crowsong for the Stricken is set in an unnamed Midwestern town, ostensibly in the year 1957. And I became very interested and invested in that community and that world. And so I continued to write some stories even after the novel was published. And I thought maybe eventually I might re-release the book in an expanded edition with these new chapters, these new stories, etc., as part of the narrative. I didn't end up doing that, but those three stories that are part of the Crowsong universe appear in Delta of Cassiopeia, Collected Stories and Songs, which came out in 2023. But anyway, while I was still thinking along those lines of doing an expanded version of Crowsong for the Stricken with this new material, one of the stories I really started thinking about that part of Crowsong for the Stricken actually originally appeared in the 50th anniversary edition of Southern Humanities Review, and it's a story called Sheol, Sheol. And I really liked that story. Sheol's about a character named Old Man Stevenson who is about to turn 100. And in the story, there's this other character, not nearly as important as the main character, but she comes up often, who is named Biddy Ferguson. And she is a much younger woman than Old Man Stevenson. Ralph is his real name. And she's very devoted to him, like a daughter, but she's not related to him, blood relation-wise. But in the story, I don't really explore why she is so devoted to him. And I got to thinking about that later. And so I decided that I would write kind of a prequel to that story in particular. And I wrote a story that I ended up titling First Kings, set 50 years before, so in 1907. And it's about Ralph when he's about 50 then, and he encounters Biddy when she's a little girl. And so they have this this kind of accidental, adventure together, so to speak. And I really liked that story, which again I called First Kings. It was published in North American Review, which I very much appreciated. And that immediately set me on writing a second story, very similar to that, also set in 1907. It's during this huge snowstorm that's taking place. And so I wrote the second story, which I ended up calling Hosea. It very quickly got picked up. I think Bel Hombre published that. And at that point, I realized, okay, I'm not just writing stories to eventually publish an expanded edition of Crowsong for the Stricken. I am on a new narrative path. And so at that point, I decided that I would use those as the starting point for a whole new novel, a prequel to the whole book, Crowsong for the Stricken, again set in 1907 during this terrible snowstorm that is pretty much shutting down the countryside. And the thing about Crowsong for the Stricken was, and this was an intentional choice, there are a couple plot devices going on, a couple plot scenarios in Crowsong for the Stricken that all the stories sort of orbit around kind of loosely. But I deliberately have it be a very loose sort of narrative structure in terms of plot. For this novel, which again, the novel that became the Strophes of Job, I decided to tighten that. And so I've tightened sort of the nucleus of the book. And so instead of it occurring over several months, as Crowsong does, this is very focused on about a 2-day time period in 1907, where, again, there's this terrible blizzard going on. And just to give a little bit more about the plot, basically there are these two families, the Frys and the Johnsons. They both have women who are about to give birth as this terrible snowstorm hits. And it's going to be a difficult birth in both cases. And there's only one midwife in the area, and she has to decide who she's going to help, etc. Different family members from both the Frys and the Johnsons venture out into the snowstorm to try to accomplish various things. And so the Strophes of Job is like Crowsong in that it tells this story from multiple perspectives. Every chapter is a new perspective from a different character. And it's like Crowsong in that it's pretty structured temporally, but even more so than Crowsong. As I say, it's in 1907 and very specifically in about a 2-day time period there. Now, early on in the process, when I only had 3 of the stories episodes for the Strophes of Job, I sent them to Word Runner e-Chapbooks, a competition they were having for story collections. I thought, well, I got 3 stories. I can collect those together. So I sent them to Word Runner e-Chapbooks, and lo and behold, they won the competition and were published as a 3-story digital text titled First Kings and Other Stories. Not very clever, but those first 3 stories were First Kings, Hosea, and then a story I called The Widow's Son. And those 3 stories came out in 2020, I think, as a digital text. But that really was, a nice little jolt of encouragement as I embarked on writing the rest of the novel. So I really appreciate Word Runner e-Chapbooks publishing those 3 stories, early on in the process. Now, the stories of the Strophes of Job, not as many of them were published prior to the book coming out. And one of the reasons for that, the main reason, in fact, was I'm very pleased and happy to have been a part of Southern Humanities Review, especially their 50th anniversary issue. So that's terrific. But I actually finished the novel about 2 years before. And then when Southern Humanities Review accepted Sheol, it was going to be about 2 years before the story was published, which is pretty typical for literary journals, especially really, venerable, literary journals that have, thousands and thousands of submissions every year and a sort of skeleton, editorial staff, as just about every literary journal does. So basically, I had to delay the publication of Crowsong for 2 whole years, waiting for this issue of Southern Humanities Review to come out. There's another story, Erebus, I believe it was, which Everest published. They too held on to it for quite a while. So that summer before I released Crowsong, both Southern Humanities Review came out with Sheol, and Everest came out with, again, Erebus. And so once those two stories appeared for the first time there in those venues, I was able to release the whole novel. I didn't want a similar kind of thing to happen with the Strophes of Job. So while I was getting close to finishing the book, I just stopped sending out material because I didn't want to run into the good problem of having somebody accept a piece, but it was going to be a year or two or longer before they were going to publish it, and that might delay the release of this book. Now, as it turns out, it was delayed by a couple of years anyway, but that's a whole nother story, which I'll save for another video. All right, but I do want to read a little bit from the Strophes of Job. And as I say, it's set in 1907 during this terrible, terrible blizzard. And again, there are these two families, the Johnsons and the Frys, so these farm families, and they both are on the verge of births within their families, but they're going to be difficult births. Now, Crowsong for the Stricken, as I say, was set in 1957, except for one story. I went back to the 1920s and wrote a story that is alluded to in other episodes, other stories in Crowsong. And I've done a similar kind of thing here in the Strophes of Job. It's all set in 1907, again, during about a 2-day time period. But for one of the pieces, I went back actually 50 years and wrote a story from one of the characters' perspective when he was a young man. We meet him in the novel when he's very old, much older, 50 years older, in fact. And so I'm actually going to read that story for this little video. And the Strophes, by the way, it's kind of an unusual title, I realize, and it can mean different things. It's more of a musical term, but it really comes from Greek theater, the origins of theater, Greek theater. And Strophes talks about the songs that the chorus would sing and how they would kind of move on the stage and so forth. And so I basically have tried to structure the entire book as a sort of performance. And each of the episodes is a strophe. And then I've also incorporated intervals, which is another kind of musical thing. And I've also incorporated artwork done by yours truly, which I have put into the narrative as anti-strophes, movements in the opposite direction. So anyway, a lot of stuff happening here. But I'm going to read the strophe, which is titled "The Falseness of Prophecy." Now, all of the strophes have titles that are drawn from biblical stories. And so that's another kind of element that I'm playing with in this book. But again, this is The Falseness of Prophecy. The Whisky Blot kindly published this when I sent it to them. So this has been out for a while. And again, this story is set about 1857. It's set in Germany as opposed to a small Midwestern community. And again, though, it's about one of the characters when he is a young man, and his name is Hab, H-A-B. So here is The Falseness of Prophecy, which is strophe number 3 in the Strophes of Job. We would be heroes. Service at the burgomaster's table. Gottlieb took a bite of apple, and a trail of juice traced the contours of his prominent chin. He was more than a year younger than Hab, but acted older. Even when they were children, Gottlieb took charge of their play, choosing the game and the terms of it, determining who won and who lost. Hab didn't know if he and Gottlieb were best friends or if their connection was based more on happenstance, being born in the same small village, close in age, and their families sharing pasture land. Gottlieb's grandfather owned the land. Hab's father leased space in the pasture. Even though the family's sheep mixed together and there was no way to distinguish which sheep belonged to which family in the spring, When the flocks were separated for shearing and slaughtering, Gottlieb's family was guaranteed the same number of sheep pastured in the fall. All losses came from Hab's family. Newborn lambs were divided evenly. If the number wasn't even, Gottlieb's family received the odd head. The arrangement between the families had been struck when Gottlieb's grandfather was a boy. During a bad year, if Fluke ran wild, for instance, it could be nearly ruinous for Hab's family. For weeks, something had been preying on the flock. One by one, the sheep were disappearing. It went unnoticed at first until the remains of a young ewe were found at the edge of the field. The situation was suddenly obvious. At night, there were no disturbances. The dogs didn't bark. There were no irregular noises, no nervous edge to the sheep's bleating with the coming of darkness. The two families attempted to keep the predicament to themselves, not wanting to be the focus of village gossip, but there was no containing it, and rumors flew. Hab's father was tired of the arrangement, made long before he was born, and he was spiriting away the sheep in the night to sell at a distant market. There was a gang of thieves, gypsies probably, who'd come down from the mountains to raid the pasture land. There was a diabolical creature afoot, a werewolf perhaps, that had a taste for the family's fat sheep. There was a pack of forest wolves, emboldened and on the prowl. Satanists, come from some city, were carrying off the sheep to use in their black rituals. We would be heroes, servants at the burgomaster's table. Gottlieb took a bite of apple, and a trail of juice traced the contours of his prominent chin. At the moment, Hab could only think of slapping the juice from Gottlieb's clownish face. For days, his emotions regarding Gottlieb, his oldest friend, had been a torment of confusion due to the tears Gott shed at Liesel's funeral. Until then, Hab didn't know that Gottlieb, too, had feelings for Liesel. Hab was suddenly stabbed by jealousy and possessiveness. Only he had a right to such pain. Only he could be paralyzed with sadness, with regret, with shame. It was the last that dammed up Hab's tears. Gottlieb wept quietly but freely. Hab's grief was a meteorite of molten iron smoldering in the pitted ground of his soul. Perhaps Hab's inability to cry, to exercise the guilt and grief, came off as indifference to Liesel's death, cold-heartedness. Maybe that is what Gottlieb believed. As Gottlieb wiped away the apple juice with his coat sleeve, Hab thought of the field where he and Liesel would sneak away to when they should have been doing chores. Wind swept the grass in waves, and they could disappear from the world, a place that Liesel dreamed of seeing. She would play with her sun-gilded braids, and her cobalt eyes would blaze as she spoke of the great cities and what she could do in each of them. Attend a Wagner in Munich, sip coffee and cream in Vienna, bicycle through the streets of Berlin, cool her feet in the fountains of Cologne, climb the great hill to the emperor's castle in Nuremberg. She was so full of life it was like a potent perfume. Hab felt light-headed in her presence. The game began with pumpkin seeds that morning in the field, hiding one in her blouse, then she in his shirt, his pants pocket, her skirt. Their hands went searching for the seeds, and it was a different game entirely. His heart hissed like an overstoked boiler as he kissed the barely a bump of her belly button. He knew his quick-coming breath was warm on her skin. It was no longer Liesel's scent of vivaciousness that dizzied him, that enkindled him. Then her parents were burning her diaries. Her voice was too clear, they said, too painful to hear. What a treasure they would be, to hold the pages she held, to clasp the hands with her thoughts, caress her dreams, care for her wishes. Perhaps the pages kept her scent, a trace of the air behind her ear, the dimple of her collarbone, the crook and the bend of Liesel's knee, all devoured by the flames before Hab even knew of their peril. It happened so quickly. She was sick, appendix inflamed, they said, then burst, they said. Then Liesel was gone, they said. He wasn't allowed to see her. No one knew the meaning of what she meant. No one knew what they were. A favorite cousin, yes, an old playmate, but nothing more. Their secret was safe, and its security kept them separated at the end. A pair of gray horses pulled the funeral cart, though such power was hardly needed. The Greys wore garlands of wild flowers while the mourners followed behind. Hab found a white petal in the road and stopped to pick it up. He held it between finger and thumb throughout the graveside service. Just as Father was finishing, a passage from Luke, a strong breeze sprang to life and Hab let the petal go on the wind. Soon it was lost from sight. At the luncheon afterward, he picked at the shepherd's pie. Every bite of food made him queasy, as if the empty feeling could only tolerate further emptiness, the dark more darkness. Meanwhile, Gottlieb ate heartily, while he regaled those at his end of the table with the story of how Lisa looked at the end. Gottlieb visited her? And what her last words to him had been. Gottlieb spoke with her? Gottlieb's mouth was half full as he shared the details. Hab was sick with jealousy and hurt. He stabbed the mutton on his plate with a fork and left the parish hall. He retched in the tall grass behind the church, but nothing came up. The potion of poisonous feelings had thoroughly soaked into his soul. We would be heroes. Service at the burgomaster's table. Gottlieb took a bite of apple, and a trail of juice raced along his prominent chin. Hab was disgusted at the sight, but there was no denying the truth. Discovering and killing whatever was thinning the flock would bring them celebrity in the village, and maybe, in time, the whole district. What was more, all the losses came from Hab's family. Win. Gottlieb swallowed the bite of apple, his own Adam's apple darting down and up dramatically. Tonight, why wait? Hab said, It's a new moon. It'll be dark, very dark. Gottlieb smiled. The element of surprise. Appleskin clung to a front tooth, giving him a moronic grin. Hab was silent about their intentions throughout the day and evening, but there was nothing unusual about his silence, not since Liesel's death. Sometimes hours passed without his uttering so much as a syllable. He imagined his parents worried, but they were equally taciturn and avoided questioning him. At 10 o'clock, he met Gottlieb behind the round barn on the north end of the pasture. It was cold, nearly freezing, in fact. Hab wore his heavy coat and a fur-trimmed cap. The coat was short in the sleeve, as he had grown since last winter. He'd taken his father's Mauser from the cabinet, its caliber better suited for the quarry he imagined. He also brought a bullseye lantern. Gottlieb, when he arrived, had similar equipage. Gottlieb raised his lantern as if he had to reveal his identity, and the oddly angled light transformed his face into a mask of scattered shadow, a frightful emblem of Gott's true nature, observed Hab in the moment. How could he not have seen him before? Gottlieb lowered his lantern and his face vanished altogether. We should spread apart, said his disembodied voice. Cover more ground. I'll walk the north and west sections. They began moving away from each other when Gottlieb added, Careful you don't shoot me. Hab envisioned the grin that accompanied Gott's comment. Gottlieb was only a voice in the dark and quickly dissolving lantern light. Something about the tone of Gottlieb's remark, its out-of-place edge of humor, reminded Hab of the story from childhood about the crimson-cloaked girl and the man-sized wolf. The human qualities of the wolf disturbed Hab's dreams, and most disquieting of all was the wolf's ability to speak. In the night, Hab would wake to the eerie cleverness of the wolf's voice as he deceived the wayward girl. Even as a child, Hab understood that since the story came from a picture book, the sound of the wolf's voice was supplied by his own imagination. The unsettling voice resided somewhere in him. The voice at last let loose into the world. He pictured Gottlieb as the wolf, uncannily human, shrewd, malevolent. Hab forced the image from his mind. He must be alert for the real predator. Here and there he sensed the sheep in the field, heard what he hoped were their movements through the grass. They were queerly quiet, only occasionally bleating in the dark. Maybe they sensed a presence in the field, something unnatural, dangerous, lethal. The moon was new and clouds obscured every star. The night Gottlieb chose to confront whatever had been taking the sheep couldn't be any blacker. To make matters worse, a half-frozen fog was forming in thick patches. The light from Hab's lantern was devoured by the dark, with only a few drops, like blood, sprinkling the invisible ground. Hab lifted the strap of the Mauser over his head and held the rifle for a sense of security. The night was colder than he thought it would be, or the cold was more penetrating. His numb fingers were clumsy handling the rifle. Hab knew the pasture well, but in the dark, with sounds disconnected from sight, it was a strange feeling place. He believed he was getting close to the spot where he and Liesl would play their children's games, like knucklebones or tic-tac-toe with stones. They spent hours there, yet he couldn't recognize it in the absolute dark. Losing his bearings touched off the loss of Liesl afresh. Random things would do that, unsteady him at odd moments, at the worst times. More and more, the poignancy of losing Liesl was paired with the sickening stew of emotions he felt toward Gottlieb. He thought of Gottlieb being with Liesl before she died, holding her hand, telling her goodbye, perhaps confessing his affection for her, so that it was the last thought on her mind, eclipsing her feelings for Hab, erasing him completely. His rage rose toward an erupting point. He began running through the dark field. Ahead, a shape formed on the freezing fog, staying before him stride for stride. It moved with the litheness of a girl. It shimmered as if made of moonlight. The feminine form, her curves contoured on the fog, beckoned Hab to follow, beseeched him. The form called to him, commanded him. He wanted to answer, Liesl! Her name was on his lips, yet the still lucid part of his mind had worked out that the form was only the lantern light reflecting off the fog, sculpting a spectral image. Before the conclusion could be fully realized, Hab tripped over something in the pasture. Hab hit the ground. The lantern went out as it flew from his hand. The Mauser discharged. In the last half moment of light, he saw something move. Then Hab lay upon the hard ground in total blackness. The fall jarred the air from his lungs, and he waited to recover his breath. He could hear something in the grass nearby. He found the box of matches inside his coat and struck one as he kneeled on his haunches. The flame revealed a ghastly thing on the ground just before him, the thing he'd tripped over, a dead sheep, its guts strung out like a serpent in the tall grass. Hab was repelled by the sight and scampered backward like a startled crab. The match went out. He tried to quickly light another, but his cold fingers fumbled the box and it fell invisible to the ground. His fingers groped woodenly in the cold, wet grass. He was again aware of the thing that moved near him. His frantic fingers found the lantern, which was worthless without the matches. He wondered why Gottlieb did not come. He must have heard the rifle shot. Then the idea dawned on him. What if Gottlieb did not come because he had accidentally shot him? What if he lay wounded, dying in the dark? Calmer now, Hab searched for the box of matches more methodically, inch by inch. He should be horrified at the thought of having shot his friend. Hab tried to summon that horror, but in its stead came a sense of satisfaction, even a seed of happiness. Emotions that Hab tried to smother at their birth. He recalled Gottlieb's monstrous mask before they began hunting the creature. His mind found images of Gottlieb bent over the dying sheep, rending it with his teeth, a trail of blood tracing the contours of his prominent chin. He thought of Gottlieb being surprised in the dark and springing away from his kill before being shot. He thought of being a hero and of service at the burgomaster's table. Hab found the matchbox. Most had spilled out, but enough remained. He lit the lantern's wick. First, he looked to the sheep's carcass to confirm what he'd seen only briefly. It was even more grisly in the fuller light. A gleam returned from the sheep's dead eye, which was worse to behold than the animal's half-eaten organs and snaking entrails. He turned to the thing still moving in the dark, hidden even more so by the tall grass. He imagined the dying Gottlieb, his face and throat badged with the ew's blood. Hab stepped on the stock of the Mauser, and he picked it up. Hab had to practically stand over the thing to identify it in the lantern's weak light. He first recognized the gray coat. He noted that only its front legs were moving, and only feebly. The wolf, a young male, was nearly dead. The bullet had entered his rib cage and maybe lodged in his backbone, crippling him where he fell. Hab was beginning to sense his disappointment when a weird sight arrested his attention. A light coming over the hillock. Gottlieb, no doubt, led by a shimmering female form, dancing in the moonless and starless night, frolicking like Salome on the fog. Hab glanced again at the dying wolf before sliding around into the Mauser's empty chamber. All right. Thank you very much for listening. You can go to tedmorrissey.com for links to all of my books, including the Strophes of Job, now out as a hardback edition. And I very much appreciate your paying attention to this video. Feel free to share liberally.